John chapter 5. We'll be looking at the first 18 verses this morning, but just because y'all have been standing for a while, and I try not to be a slave driver, we'll read through the first 6 verses, and then I'll have you all be seated and we'll carry on. So, John chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. It reads, "After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. And whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he said unto him, Wilt thou be made whole?" You may be seated. So we open up here John chapter 5, coming off of the events of John chapter 4. I continually remind you of the sort of timeline that we're looking at here in John, because it helps us to understand, it helps us to put these accounts that we're reading into a more physical perspective, right? We understand distance, we understand time, we understand interpersonal relationships and interactions. We even understand traveling from town to town. But when we read these accounts, it can be hard for us to remember that these are physical places, physical people, that these are things that actually happened. And at least for me, and I hope for the rest of you, it helps me to understand and to remember these things through that lens, that perspective, that these things did happen. Or if they did happen, there's places where people went, right? Physical locations. There are things that people were dealing with. Here we read about a man who is dealing with a physical ailment, being paralyzed, unable to move for 38 years is the implication here. He wasn't able to get himself into this pool. We read about this miracle here in John chapter 5, and we can either separate it from reality and just say, oh, that's a great tale, or we can do our best to really put these physical bounds on it. When we come into chapter 5, coming off of chapter 4, as John records Jesus traveling into Samaria, right? We read about that. Having this interaction with that Samaritan woman at the very place where the nation was divided under Rehoboam and Jeroboam, when the nation was divided back 2 generations after David, right? There's David, Solomon, and then his son Rehoboam, who lost the kingdom as a whole. Well, the place where Jesus interacted with the Samaritan woman, where he told her that worship would be restored, and it wouldn't matter whether you worshipped at Mount Gerizim or on the mountain in Jerusalem, that everywhere man would worship God was the same place where the worship was divided, where the nations in the north set up their golden calves as idol worship, and then Jerusalem also fell into idol worship, but they had the temple there. Right, so there's that aspects there. And then we move on as Jesus continued to move north into Galilee. Last time we were together, we spoke about how this interaction that he had as he was going into Galilee to really begin his ministry was one of the first places in John where we see the timeline, the time frame of John interact and intersect with the other Gospels. Remember, the first about 3.5 chapters, 4 chapters of John take place during the time in between in the other Gospels where we read Jesus he was baptized, went into the wilderness, came back, went up to Galilee, and began his ministry by calling his apostles. John fills in that void for us. And then John chapter 4 is where we find these timelines intersecting again with the healing of this man. But last time, as we looked at the healing of this man, we spoke about how Jesus did this as a light in the wilderness, right? Or a light in the darkness. This was another interaction that he had, another miracle that he performed for a Gentile man as he was going into that area to begin his ministry, separated from Jerusalem, separated from the hub of Jewish religion. And so we find that in chapter 5 there's a little bit of a break. Now in chapter 6, when we make it there, probably in 2 or 3 more weeks, we will find that the timelines of John and the rest of the Gospels intersect again with the feeding of the 5,000. But for now, we're just studying this event as it happens, as it's recorded for us. We find that there was a feast of the Jews that drew Jesus from Galilee, from that area where he was, back into Jerusalem. Now, it is interesting to note that the name of this pool, the name of this place, Bethesda or Bethesda, as some translations will give us, it means house of mercy or house of grace in Hebrew and Aramaic. And it means a place or house of mercy. And it's listed or recorded as being by this place called the Sheep Gate. We'll get there after we read on here, before I get too distracted and forget to read the rest of our text. So let's continue reading here in verse 7. It says, "The impotent man answered and said to him, Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. And Jesus said unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, took up his bed, and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, It is the Sabbath day, it is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. And he answered them, He that made me whole, the same said unto me, Take up thy bed, and walk. And when they then asked they him, What man is that which said unto thee, Take up thy bed and walk? And he that was healed wist not for who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. Afterward Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. Therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus, and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. But Jesus answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he had not only broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. So we find that there's this miracle that occurred. This miracle that occurred. The man was cured in this miracle that occurred. It's a tongue twister, I tell you. But the reason why we're emphasizing the physicality of this is because this location, to us, doesn't really mean anything, right? It's a pool of water, this place called Bethesda, somewhere around Jerusalem, by something called a sheep gate. And for those of us who maybe aren't super familiar with the history of Jerusalem and the area surrounding the city, this doesn't really mean anything to us. The first thing that we need to note is that this is only about 100 yards north of the temple. Right? So in the layout of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, you have the city sprawling, you have the temple on the east side of the city, out kind of protruding out of the city, and then up just to the north, on the outskirts of the city, you have this pool of Bethesda. And it was a natural spring. It had just kind of been there right? And eventually it got split into two pools. There's an upper pool, a lower pool. These are things that people have found in digging in the area. That there was, they found these five. Let me see if I can find the word that's used here. Porches. These porches. It's kind of a mistranslation in our Bibles. It's like a covered area. There's a different word for it. But think about like when you go to the fair. You know, in the livestock barns, there's the area where it's just kind of a covering, and it's kind of like a lean-to, a long lean-to. Think about kind of that, where it's open air, but it's a covering from the sun, shaded by either like a clay tile roof, or by a cloth roof. A place where someone could get out of the sun, could maybe have a little bit of shelter from the weather. And they've actually found there, just north of the Temple Mount, a live spring. It has since stopped producing a lot of water, but divided into these pools with these 5 different porches. And there's like I said, an upper pool, there's a dam, and then there's a lower pool. The upper pool was the source of the water, the source of the spring, that would trickle down into the lower pool. And this lower pool was used as a mikvah, or as a place of cleansing. So as we read in this account, most likely there was the upper pool which fed the lower pool, and in the lower pool was this gathering of people under these porches, or under these lean-tos, as they were resting from the sun. Now, we've all been sick before, right? We're human. We have all hurt before. What is your natural reaction when you're sick or when you're hurting? I want to get better, right? I'm a man. I get man colds. The minute I feel it coming on, I get just absolutely miserable, and I want to do anything to make it stop. I start thinking about how much I've taken my good health for granted, because this nostril's clogged and this one's on fire, right? It's miserable. And if you are in that situation and you have an opportunity to instantly make it feel better, you're going to take it, aren't you? Right? It's part of how we what's the word I want? How we're designed, I guess. When we feel something give us pain, our reaction is to try and take it away. When we feel ill, our reaction is to try and remedy it. Because nobody wants to be sick. No one wants to be hurt. Well, you have this pool surrounded by these people who are all sick. We're all hurt. Their physical bodies are suffering. Some of them can't see. Some of them can't hear. Some of them can't walk. Maybe some of them broke their hand or broke their foot. Maybe some of them have had a cough and it's just driving them crazy. Well, when there's a pool that people are saying, hey, when you see the water there, start moving around, start to stir. If you can make it there first, and you can touch that water, you're healed. How quickly do you think people are swarming to that water when it begins to move? Probably pretty quickly. At least for the ones that can move quickly, as we see in our account here. So you have people that, without regard of the suffering for others, because human nature, are seeing the stirring of this water. They've heard that it can heal their ailments, it can heal their hurt, and they're rushing into this pool and just touching the water so that they can be healed. And naturally, it leaves everybody else without a hope. I don't know how often this stirring of the water occurred, if it was a daily occurrence, if it was happened every once in a while. It kind of seems like that time frame is a little bit vague. It's just at a certain season, into the pool, troubled the water. Right? So every once in a while, you don't exactly know when, that water's going to move, and you're going to have to be the first one to touch it. There's no reliability to it, just that it'll happen. And there's no hope for second place. You touch the water, you're healed. If you don't make it first, keep on waiting. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. We find that this pool, this place, has a bit of a history in the Scriptures. There is here, and we're going to dig into it a little bit deeper, there is an element to this pool being a place of the troubles of man being met with the promise of God. These people had come to rely on the stirring of that water as being something that they could touch it and they knew they would be healed if they were first. Let's turn over to 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 17. Actually, that's just one verse, so I'll read that off my paper, but you all turn to Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 1. And I'll read 2 Kings 18 here, and then we'll follow along in Isaiah chapter 7. So 2 Kings chapter 18 says, the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabasaris and another guy whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce, from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. And when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. Now you might think, well, Noah, that just says the upper pool. How do we know that that's the same place that we're talking about? And there's a couple of reasons. Remember when we first started talking about this, I mentioned that this pool is just north of the Temple Mount, right? Just about 100 yards at most north of the Temple Mount. It's on the outside of the city, and it's divided into two pools already, an upper and a lower. There's not really any other place like this in that area. All right, so we have a place right by the temple with this pool of water there. So we can infer that this is most likely the same pool that we're reading about in the New Testament. And what happens? The king of Assyria sends his representatives to King Hezekiah, and they came to this place, and they began to challenge Hezekiah. Now, right before this event, we read about how Hezekiah rebelled against the king of Assyria. He was in tribute to Assyria, giving monies to the king to basically pay him off and say, don't come down here, we'll just send you the treasure and save you the strife of gathering your army and marching all the way down here, right? So we'll just send the gold. Hezekiah plundered the temple. At the beginning of his reign, he began to try and restore the temple because his father had stripped it of all its treasures. And so Hezekiah worked really hard to rebuild the temple. And then he stripped it again because the Assyrians were demanding more payment. And finally it got to the point where Hezekiah just said, I'm done paying these tithes. I'm done bearing this burden. It's more than we can bear. Look what I had to do to the house of God. Had to strip it bare. And the king of Assyria came down and challenged Hezekiah. And I would encourage you, if you haven't recently, read the rest of 2 Kings chapter 18. It is a beautiful account. The king comes down and he challenges not only Hezekiah, but the God of Hezekiah. He challenges not only Jerusalem, but he challenges the God who said, I will put my throne there. I will dwell there. And he comes to this place outside of the temple to do it. That's a challenge of man, isn't it? We'll read what happens here in a little bit. But before we get too distracted, if you're not there already, I'm not there already. Turn to Isaiah chapter 7. We'll begin here in verse 1. So this is talking to Ahaz, who is Hezekiah's dad. Okay, so there's already a history built up here. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 1 says, And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it. but could not prevail against it. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, Go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou and Sherzah, another guy, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. And say unto him, Take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin of Syria, for the son of Remaliah, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, Let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, son of Tabal. Thus saith the Lord God, It shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. So we read here, the same place, this king is directed to go, and he meets, and he's told these things. Don't worry about these kingdoms that are taking confederation against you, Israel and Syria. Their combined power isn't going to do anything. They will meet their end. The trials of man, the problems of man, meeting with the promise of God. Now for Ahaz, for Hezekiah, for the man who has had that ailment for 38 years, problems of man are overwhelming, right? There's no solution to a problem that you've had for 38 years, and you can't go to the only place that gives you any hope of healing. There's no solution when the might of the Syrian Empire confederates with your brothers to the north to destroy you. There's no hope when the Assyrian Empire, a brutal and very mighty empire in the day, is knocking on your door with their armies and saying, Open up your gates. There's no hope. But by God there is. We continue to read through that account there in John 5, and we find that God is that hope. And the thing that the man couldn't do for himself, the healing that he was searching for, that he was longing for, something that he could not provide for himself, was provided by the Lord. Now there's also a reason why this place was called the Sheep Gate. Let's turn over to Nehemiah chapter 3. Nehemiah chapter 3. This is a very important place for the city of Jerusalem. It's only mentioned a few times, but it's a very important place. Because of its proximity to the temple, because it was a natural spring, the blessing of the Lord of water in a place that needed the water. We're just going to grab two verses here in Nehemiah chapter 3 though. Verse 1 says, Then Eliashib the high priest rose up with his brethren the priests, and they builded the sheep gate, and they sanctified it, set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of Meah, they sanctified it unto the tower of Peniel. So you find here, chapter 3, verse 1, the first thing that these Israelites do, that these men of Israel do, is they restore the sheep gate. Right? Jerusalem had been completely destroyed when Babylon came in and took Israel captive. When the people were allowed 70 years later to go back into Jerusalem, to rebuild Jerusalem, the first place that they started, the first thing they did was restore this sheep gate. It must be an important place. And not only was it the first thing that they did, but the priests were the ones who rebuilt the sheep gate. And it was the beginning of where they started to build the rest of the wall of Jerusalem. And it was the place where they ended. Right? They did just a big old loop. And we read through the rest of Nehemiah chapter 3 about the different gates and how it was reconstructed. And that's a different study for a different time. I won't bore you with that today. We find at the end of chapter 3 here, we'll just grab 31 and 32. It says, after him repaired Melchiah, the goldsmith's son, into the place of Nethinims and of the merchants over against the gate Mithkad, and going up the corner. And between the going up the corner unto the sheep gate, repaired the goldsmiths and the merchants. So on one side of the sheep gate you have the priests repairing it, and then you have the goldsmiths and the merchants repairing the wall in that area. Now, never mind, we don't need to get into that history. So, no, it's important. Now there's a reason why it was called the sheep gate. I read to you a couple of excerpts from an article on the rebuilding of Jerusalem from a website called IsraelMyGlory.org, and they go into this full rebuilding of Jerusalem. But it says some of the work assignments were given according to vocations. For instance, the high priests and other priests were assigned to rebuild the sheep gate, which was important to the priests because animals were brought through that gate to the temple for sacrificial offerings. And then another excerpt says the sheep gate was located on the northeast corner of the wall. It was so named because the sheep were led through it to the temple. And it was near the market where the sheep were sold and close to the sheep pool where the temple sacrifices were washed. The sheep gate was also near the pool of Bethesda. We find that this article is just saying that this is called the sheep gate because it was the place where the sheep went in. It's the place where the sacrifices for the temple were brought into the city to be slain for the glory of God. We find that this pool, that this area was a place where the struggles of man, the trials of man were met with the promise of God. The promise of God was, you bring me these sacrifices, you slay these sacrifices, worship me, I'll forgive your sin. Right? These were sacrifices in atonement for that sin. That's the trial of man, isn't it? Taking the sheep, atoning for sin, making the sacrifices. So time and time again we find this principle in this area. Now for us today, I'm going to ask you a question expecting an answer. For us today, where do the problems of man meet with the promise of God? Prayer, yeah. Is there a physical location? Church. Right. We find that we bring our problems. We bring who we are, what we're struggling with. We come through the door of the church carrying the weight of our week with us. The things that we're struggling with. The things that the people that we love are struggling with. And when we come in those doors, what do we expect to find? Isn't it assurance of the promise of God? When we come to church, sometimes it feels like a burden, doesn't it? Sometimes it feels like I got to go all the way to church. I got to go through the doors. Noah's going to talk way too much. He's going to talk way over my head about things that I don't care about. And it's just a great big old struggle. Why do I have to go? Right? Because we carry our problems to be assured of the promise of God. And as we look through the Scriptures, from the very beginning to the very end, we find the assurance of God all through it. We find His promise that this isn't all there is. We find His promise that there is healing. We find His promise that He is here with us to heal us of our hurts when we have. There are a lot of people that day sitting at that pool waiting for the stirring of the water who never had an interaction with Christ. That man who was touched by Christ, his life was changed. There are a lot of people that we will interact with, that we would hope, just, Lord, heal this person, who will never have an interaction with Christ. Now, That's not the way it should be. Right? We would hope and we would pray just as the Lord desires that every man would be saved. Reality is, most people look everywhere else for their healing. That's one other thing that jumps out in this account, was that the thing that worked for some people for their healing didn't work for everyone. How often do we look to places where other people look for our healing, for our hope? We look to, I don't know, I don't want to name off a whole list of different things that we look at, but we look at a lot of things that aren't Christ. We say, well, that helped my friend or that helped my family member. Surely it'll help me. No, you surely don't. That'll definitely help me. And then it doesn't. We find that the medicine doesn't work the way the doctor said it would. We find that the substance doesn't take the pain away. Or there's no better distraction to take my mind off the things that are consuming it. But we're people who have interacted with Christ, aren't we? And what do we find there that the man was doing after he was healed? He said, he healed me. Now there was fallout with the Jews. There would be fallout with people when we tell them of what Christ has done for us. How could that happen? You silly Christian. You mean to tell me that you believe that God can heal you, but He chooses not to? You expect me to believe that I can pray and all my problems will just go away? Which isn't true also. Or you would rather go to church than do this thing or that thing? It seems silly, doesn't it? It seems silly that someone could touch a pool and be healed. It seems silly that Christ could say, take up your bed, walk, and a man could be healed. But when the problems of men are met with the promise of God, anything can happen. We find that our focus should not be on our problems. It should be on what God has promised us. I'll be with you. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest. We let God take care of the problems that we know there is no other help for. I referenced earlier that we would see what happened after that account in 2 Kings 18. I'll just read chapter 19, verse 5 through 7 for you. It says, So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, and Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say to your master, and thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he will hear a rumor, and will return to his own land. And I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. Don't worry about the physical ailments that come to this body. You're going to get a new one. Right? That's our equivalent. Don't worry about death. It's already been overcome. Christ conquered it. One day death and hell will be cast into the lake of fire, and we won't have to think about it again. That doesn't mean we don't have to endure the hardship. It doesn't mean that Hezekiah didn't have to endure the panic, right, as he's shaken, barely able to stand. But when we know what the promise of the Lord is, we can be assured that He will carry us through. We can be assured that we can bear our insurmountable burdens to Him. And that if He doesn't give us an immediate fix for it, He at least gives us peace. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 9. We were going to talk a little bit about the persecution of the Jews, as the Jews decided to persecute Jesus, but we can talk about that next week as we prepare to talk about his answer to them. But in Matthew chapter 9 we find a very similar occurrence, very similar miracle and event. Matthew chapter 9, beginning in verse 1, says, "And he entered into a ship and passed over and came down into his own city. And behold, they brought to him a sick man of the palsy, laying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins are forgiven thee. And behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, This man blasphemes. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? For whether it's easier to say, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and walk. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. Then saith he to the sick of the palsy, Arise, take up thy bed, and go to thy house. And he arose and departed to his house. But when the multitude saw it, they marveled, and glorified God, which had given such power unto men." We think that often that the greatest challenges that we could present God with are the things that we find are the greatest challenges in our lives. People that rub us the wrong way, the things that are hurt that won't stop hurting, the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We say, God, can you handle it? Will you? We find that by this testimony, it is as easy for him to say, be healed, arise and walk, as it is to say, your sins are forgiven. And what did he do when he came and died on the cross? If not say, your sins are forgiven. By faith we endure, by faith we follow him. By faith we have assurance that there is healing in him. That's all I have for you this morning. I hope and I pray that these things were a blessing to you.